Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Social Security and Medicare, $157 trillion deficit. The rest of the budget, $19 trillion surplus. Posted by Lemon Limelight, and they said a newly updated chart book from Brookings examines spending, taxes, and deficits, and highlights the glaring problem: entitlements. The budget could be balanced by focusing solely on just Social Security, Medicare. Easier said than done, of course, but at least it identifies priorities. From page 61, I guess, sailing to the report from Brookings that says that. And yeah, personally, I think libertarian positions, if people want to pay for Social Security, Medicare, I think they should be able to, but it's important to remember that those are very much what puts the United States in great debt. With that being said, they're not the worst programs the government has. I would rather be paying for those than paying for constantly bombing the Middle East or any other foreign country for that matter. But ultimately, it should come down to what the taxpayer wants first and foremost. If they want to pay for Social Security, Medicare, they should be able to do so, but they shouldn't be forced to do so if they don't want to, and that's very much the libertarian perspective. You should be able to do whatever you want with your own resources. You should, choose what you want to do with your own resources. You don't let the government just pick and choose what it wants to do with your resources. You should be the one who gets to choose what to do with your resources, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have U.S. Fed police harass residents for no reason. Lawsuit incoming. Posted by Fasty Ravina 739, and that's a cross post from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit. And that looks like a video about I guess the police doing that. And yeah, personally, if the police want to justify harassing you for no reason, oftentimes there's nothing you can really do about it, because they have the state on their side, so, and the state controls the courts and legal system as well. And a lot of times the state's not going to go after its own. And yeah, personally, I would say the libertarian perspective is, don't get involved, trying to stay out of the way of the police rather than constantly agitating them like a lot of Redditors seem to do. But ultimately justify what everyone justify. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Pete Hegseth's Pulp Fiction prayer isn't the first time he's used religion to justify illegal war in Iran from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think that you should be citing fictional material when it comes to your prayers or anything, but ultimately justify whatever you want to justify. I remember in regards to a firearms case a while ago, the Supreme Court of Hawaii cited the TV show The Wire, and I think that's kind of cringe as well. But of course, Reddit didn't care about that nearly as much, since that was the in-group doing it rather than the out-group doing it. And yeah, personally, if you want to cite whatever fiction you want to cite, I think that's fine, just by citing whatever you want to. But I do think it's a lot of cringe, especially when Redditors compare themselves to things like Star Wars, The Lord of the Rings, or Harry Potter. Not so much Harry Potter anymore, since J.K. Rowling doesn't like transgender people, but definitely the former two, I would say. Next, we have Tennessee's Charlie Kirk Act bans student walkouts, protects conservative speakers from WPLN.org, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's cross-post from the Law subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian perspective is, if students want to justify student walkouts, they should be able to, and the state shouldn't be protecting speakers, whether they be conservative or woke, ultimately, I would say the libertarian perspective is, we gotta support freedom of speech, regardless of which side's doing it. Ultimately, I would say the libertarian perspective is the government shouldn't be involved with student walkouts or protecting speakers, regardless of their political affiliation. We do need to support free speech. That's what Charlie Kirk would have wanted, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have San Jose's creepy and deeply intrusive ALPR camera system is unconstitutional, a new lawsuit says, from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for governments spying on people, but ultimately, the government can spy on whatever they want to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it, especially when the state has the power to justify doing brave governments justify, and there's no one to hold them accountable, since they're the ones in the position of authority and you aren't. Next, we have House passes short-term spy powers extension and late-night vote after deal falls apart, from thehill.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, this is just another example of that. If the government wants to spy on its people, I personally don't think they should be doing that. But oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it, since they're the ones in the positions of authority and you aren't. Next, we have Trump says he's willing to risk your rights for his surveillance powers from Reason.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's yeah. I personally don't think the government should be wasting your rights for surveillance powers. But ultimately, as I said, he's the one in a position of authority. He can justify pretty much whatever he wants to. Nothing stopped him so far over the past decade. Why is anything going to stop him now? Next, we have Congress declines again to rein in Trump's Iran war from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for the Iran war, but I think even if Congress did vote against it, Congress doesn't really have the power to do much in regards to enforcement. The enforcement mostly goes to the executive branch, and also ultimately, I don't know if they'll want to pull out of the war soon, but it's ultimately their decision, I would say, rather than the Congress. I think the Congress should be the one making the decision rather than the executive branch, but ultimately the executive branch is probably the one with most authority, since a lot of people defer to whatever the president says. And ultimately, I would say the Libertarian position is, we should be out of Iran, but ultimately the U.S. can stay there for as long as they want to. They stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years. Maybe they'll stay in Iran for 20 years as well. I don't know. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Stop Killing Games at the EU Parliament, posted by USMC at BF, and that's a video from YouTube video from Europe Echo. Should video game publishers be allowed to disable games you bought? European Parliament hearing. And I personally would say the Libertarian position is, video game publishers should be able to do that. It's something they sold to. Well, I guess I could see both ways. It's their products. Ultimately, if they retain ownership of it, even if you bought it, that's why I think you gotta buy physical games rather than digital games, because the digital games allows them to have more control over the media than they would have if it was physical and you own it outright. But ultimately, they can justify whatever they want to justify. They're the ones who often control their games, and and in some cases the consoles they're played on. And in the case of companies like Nintendo, Sony, or Microsoft, I would say. And then the OP added, "This is such an absurd situation because Stop Killing Games is a reaction to problems caused by government regulation, strict and extensive IP laws. They fix problems by more government regulation. This trope is so common. For example, Electronics Arts to shut down Battlefield 2 online support more than 10 years ago, and they sued a fan server hosting project to revive Battlefield 2. This would not have happened if IP laws were as strict as they were and currently are. Revive BF2 would continue to provide server hosting platform, and EA would not be able to legally take it down. That's a problem with the way FTG argues for its case. It's true that you do not own the game is owned by the company. You own a particular copy. Obviously, the details for the purchase are described in the end-user license agreement and also regulated by the particular legal jurisdiction you happen to be in, but you do own the content on your computer, the copy of the game. Technically speaking, in a lot of cases, you have the ability to still play the game without official support in some kind of capacity unless the game requires full online support. The issue is pirating is pretty widespread, even if illegal modifications done to the game without reading it are kind of hard to prosecute, but fundamentally you are breaking the EULA, DRM, and law, then getting away with it because of the inability to enforce the law. So I just made a full circle back to the IP laws. I don't like the argument you pay for something and something changed, and it's all stupid to compare video games to books as he did in the EU Parliament. You do not own the book, Mathematics Volume 3. The book was written by Jerry whoever guy who you own the copy, and the reason why I can say this is because you still have the copy of the video game. So it's not like the company goes in and takes away your copy of the game physically, or that the bookstore takes away your book. It's more like the ability to read the book or the ability to use the book in a particular way ceases to be doable, and that is dangerous as goes something like complaining about factual book eventually being outdated or being sold with mistakes in it. If I'm buying a book for factual information, that factual information is wrong, and I cannot use it for that particular purpose anymore. Should I be then compensated? Was I under the honest impression that the book was factual, and there was no way for me to know that the factual information is going to be ineffectual down the line, if at all? Even if you don't know that like the above described argument I made, the fundamental problem is IP laws, and so the solution should be allowed individuals to modify the game and share without legal trouble, instead for companies to biologically virtually ignore their IP, which many find necessary, while at the same time dictating what the company must and must not do to provide the consumers that buy the video game. And I would agree with all that. Ultimately, as I said, it comes down to, you don't own the game, you own a copy of the game, and, ultimately, I think you should be able to do it, the copy however you want to. You should be able to modify it however you want to, and et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, ultimately, if it's connected to the internet, the company that owns the game can cut you off at any second. Oftentimes, there's nothing you can do about it, I would say. So ultimately, I would say that's another thing why you should buy physical over digital. I would say physical oftentimes has the company that they have less power over it than if you buy a game digitally, I would say. Next, we have FISA Section 702, What the Second Amendment Community Should Know, from Cato.org, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, like the rest of the amendments, the Second Amendment, the government can finds as many workarounds as possible, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Personally, I think it shall not be infringed, but ultimately the government can justify infringing your rights whenever it feels like it, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it since they're the ones in the position of authority, and no one, so they were holding accountable. I guess you could say through voting, but ultimately voting's just gonna send to put a different branch of the Unity Party in there. It's gonna agree on like 95% of the stuff, while disagreeing on a few token cultural issues like abortion and LGBTQ, whatever other letters they've added as well. Next, we have Democrats are not our friends, they're the enemies just like the Republicans, posted by Ragnarok KX3, and that's cross-post from the Late Stage Capitalism subreddit, and that looks like a tweet from More Perfect Union. Breaking, the House just failed to pass a resolution to end Trump's warfare and by one vote. The House 213 to 214. Just one Democrat, Jared Golden, voted to let Trump keep waging the war. And yeah, personally, Jared Golden's probably one of the better Democrats of a good bit of the time, but I don't like how he voted to let Trump keep waging the war here. But with that being said, they really are just a uniparty. The Democrats, I'm sure a lot of Democrats, if they knew that the vote was gonna go the other way, they'd switch. They're only just being token opposition rather than being genuine opposition. Ultimately, I think if they knew that, if the Democrats knew that the vote was going to turn out 214 to 213, a lot of the 213 who did vote to end the war would have changed their votes if they knew there wasn't enough votes. And it just goes to show, they're just controlled. I would say both parties are controlled opposition. They're really just. It's really just like the WWE, it's all just a theater, it's a big club and you ain't in it, as George Carlin famously said. Then we had a post I wanted to share. I did to the Libertarian Party USA subreddit as well. I said, Libertarian perspectives on physical fitness. As libertarians, we believe that each individual should be able to do whatever they want in regards to their own body. If they want to be a 600-pound loser whose only activity is sitting around monitoring Reddit all day, they have every right to do so. With that being said, I think it's important that libertarians be physically fit, since these years government authoritarianism and yours as mobile as possible, and it's not something you do if you are morbidly or obese. False. And I had in the comments, one guy said, what about disability? What's the libertarian perspective on that? I said, some people might not have access to abilities and resources other people have. The libertarian perspective is that if people want to help them, they should be able to, but they should try to be as self-sufficient as possible. And that's my thoughts there. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.